Oh, there we go. Recording in progress. Good morning. Okay. So we got up to the Mishnah, Daf Kaf Beit Masechet Beitzah, Daf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph. All right. Let's see the Mishnah again. We're now dealing with the melacha of shchita. Says the Mishnah, Be'ema mesukenet lo yishchot elam ken yashot bayom le'achol mimena kazayit tzli. Okay, so we're dealing with a number of different sugyas here which come into this. We've spoken before about the idea of ha'arama on Yom Tov. You'll remember, right? So we are allowed to cook. Melechet ochel nefesh is mutar on Yom Tov. That is melechet ochel nefesh for the sake of Yom Tov. I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov. I'm not allowed to cook for Yom Tov on Yom Tov for Chol, right? So if a person decides, look, we have a busy week coming up, and everybody's going to be home, or everybody's going back to work, or whatever it is, and I have the day off on Yom Tov, I'm allowed to cook. I'm going to spend the day in Yom Tov, grilling meat and whatever, and cooking so that I have food for the whole week. It's completely forbidden. If I don't know how much food I need, and I'm going to, I'm going to have leftovers, that's okay, right? And I can cook. But if the intention is to cook on Yom Tov for the sake of the weekday, that is not okay. So then the question becomes, at what point do we say, okay, you can do a bit, and you can say, let's say I put on a whole pot and I say, all right, I'm going to eat a little bit, but really I want it for the weekday. So this is where it starts to get a bit complicated. This is where we deal with what we call harama. And the main difference is going to be in those kind of situations, am I before the meal or am I after the meal? If I'm before the meal and I still need the food on Yom Tov, so it's not really such harama. If I'm after the meal and I don't actually need it, that is clear harama. Okay, we'll see how all this relates to shchita in a moment. Let me just share with you the Shulchan Aruch when he talks about this, because these are actually very, very relevant halachot, very relevant this year as well. I think it was over here. I think. All right, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. One moment. Okay, so this is Shulchan Aruch in Hilchot Yom Tov Siman Tav Kuf Gimel. So he says, "Asur le'afot or levashel or lishchot b'Yom Tov l'tzorach machar." This is what's going to concern us right now. It says you cannot cook or bake or shecht or whatever on Yom Tov for the sake of the next day. Afilu Shabbat or Yom Tov, even if the next day is Shabbat or Yom Tov, right? Afilu b'shnei yomim shel Rosh Hashanah, even the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, where we say that it's like Yom Arichta, Rosh Hashanah, we say the 2 days are considered as one day, le'achmir, not la'akel. Aval. Right, you can fill up a pot of meat even though you can cook it even though you only need one piece. Says the Rama. You can shech, obviously, you can shech the whole animal even though you only need to eat one kazayit, because you can't just shech the kazayit. You need to shech the whole animal. You could cook many different pots, and even though you're only going to eat from a little bit from each one, you'll have leftovers, right? Now, all of this, says Shulchan Aruch Dafka Kodem Achila, that's before you've had your meal. אבל אחר אכילה אינה יכולה לבשל ולומר אוכל ממנה גזית, דהווה הרמה. But you can't, after you've already had lunch on Yom Tov, okay, now you're going to start cooking for Yom Tov, right? And you're going to say, I'm going to eat a gazayit, and I'm going to have the rest of it. That's harama. But if you did if you have already gone and you've cooked or you've shecht or whatever, you'd be allowed to eat it. Okay, it says over here the Mishnah Berurah says Yesh min achronim shemfarshei da'alei shel seif kai. This is talking about those who say it's talking about the beginning. That what? Tainu im avar v'meizid ubisham yom tov lachavelo. So interesting. He says there are those who interpret this is talking about if you were b'mezid, you cooked from one day of Yom Tov to the next. But if you did it in this way, it was harama, maybe that's even worse. And maybe b'diavad, you still won't be able to eat from it. Okay, so it's a serious thing, not so simple. So now, if we're talking about shchita, the same question, right? If I'm going to shech the animal in the morning before my meal, okay, so I need it for now. If I've already eaten and there's not so long left of Yom Tov, and I now want to go and shech the animal, so it's going to be asur. You're going to say, oh, I'll shech the animal and I'll eat a gazayit. We're going to say, that's going to be harama. You don't really want to go and eat the gazayit, you just want to shech the animal. Okay, now all of this is going to be an isur d'Rabbanan. And we'll see, but there are cases where Rabbanan would allow it. So what's the case? So our Mishnah deals with such a case, which is we have a behema mesukenet. You have an animal that is sick, and you're afraid the animal is going to die, and therefore it's going to be a great monetary loss because the animal is going to die. It's going to be a nevela, and there's nothing you can do with it. You can't sell the meat. It's not kosher. So says Rashi over here, behema mesukenet shu yalesh tamut. You're not tzarich hashekval sa'ad surato. If it's in the morning, so peseder, so you can do it and you can eat it. But he says, yeah, the case is you're worried the sick animal is going to die, and you don't actually need it. You don't need to eat the meat because you've already eaten. But you don't want to lose. You don't want to lose out, and therefore you're going to shecht it. So says the Gemara, or says the Mishnah rather, lo yishchot elam ken yeshut bayom lechol mimena. So he has the chiddush that in this case, Chachamim allow it, even though we would have said it's harama because the behema mesukenet. Chachamim will allow it so long as there is time in the day for you to eat a kazayit sli. Why sli? Because sli roasting that's the quickest form of preparing this food. So long as there's time. Notice, interesting. The Mishnah doesn't say what. It doesn't say elaim ken yochal mimenu kazayit sli. It doesn't say you can't do the shechita unless you're going to actually eat a kazayit. It says you can't do it unless there is time for you to go and eat a kazayit. Meaning the Rishonim explain as follows. A person doesn't want to transgress. A person knows that in order to shech the animal and save himself from monetary loss and not transgress what Chachamim said, he would have to eat the kazayit. So when I shech the animal, I have in mind that I'm going to eat a kazayit. And then if at the end of the day, even if I don't, it would still be okay. Again, in this case, it's only where it's a behema mesukenet. If it's not, it wouldn't be allowed. But that is what the Mishnah says. Rabbi Akiva says, even if you take kazayit that you could eat from the beit vichata, from the neck of the animal, right? It says Rashu mezumanu mufshat me'orov made. It's there and it's ready. You don't have to skin it, and you don't have to do these things which are going to take longer. Then it would be okay. So Rabbi Akiva is a little bit more makel. Even if you have a bit less time, you can still do the shechita. Then says the Mishnah, Shachta b'sadeh lo yivene b'mot of mota, aval mevi bi'ado ivarim ivarim. You can't bring it along on a pole, but you can bring one limb at a time. So Rashi says lo yivene b'mot of mota b'shnei b'nei adam. Two people carrying it, one on each side with the pole. Mishum the avsha miltahi u'mezalzel b'yom tov. That is going to be a zilzul on Yom Tov. Everybody knows, everybody can see you're doing this shechita and you're coming along and bringing meat. That's not proper. Interesting, the phrase here that Rashi uses is a phrase that comes up a lot nowadays as well in Hilchot Shabbat. So he says avsha milta. It's quite difficult to translate. And we have a number of different understandings in the Rishonim what precisely avsha milta means. Essentially, it means that it becomes known, that it's clear, that it's obvious, that it's right. We use this a lot of times when it comes to machines, appliances, alternate appliances that make noise on Shabbos. So there are discussions in the poskim. They say you wouldn't be allowed to operate something. Obviously, you can't turn it on yourself on Shabbat or Yom Tov. But if you had it running from before Shabbat, there's always a question of what's called avsha milta. If it's saying that you have a dishwasher, you have a washing machine, for example, that's in your house. If I was to turn on the washing machine just before Shabbat, okay, so I'm not doing anything on Shabbat. This is the machloka that we've seen again and again. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about shvitat kelim. According to Beit Shammai, if I would turn on my washing machine just before Shabbat and the machine is working automatically on Shabbat, that would be completely forbidden. I don't know what Beit Shammai would do in today's world of automation, etc. When they say there's no shvitat kelim, there's basically nothing you can do on Shabbat. But thankfully, we paskin like Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel say, if I'm not doing anything, there's no issur of shvitat kelim. So if I've turned it on before Shabbat, in that sense, I'm not doing anything wrong. But there might be a question of avsha milta when it makes a noise. What is it? And again, there's two main schools of thought as to precisely what is the issur behind avsha milta. One is that it's just making a noise, and it's not in the honor of Shabbos. And there's another one that says, no, maybe avsha milta means the fact that it's making a noise means people might suspect you People might think that you turned it on Shabbat. Okay, so these are all different considerations. Again, nowadays most of the machines are much quieter than they were once upon a time. So all sorts of fascinating discussions about washing machines and bread makers and vacuum cleaning robots and all sorts of things. This is not science fiction. This is reality today. And a lot of these things, even if the poskim were a bit more reticent initially, you'll find many heterim nowadays. Again, it's not a psak, but there are many heterim nowadays because A, everybody knows that it's all automated. B, a lot of things don't really make much noise at all. And therefore, there could be room to rely on. We spoke once about Rav Rimon's tshuva about using a robot vacuum cleaner on Shabbat. There may be ways in which it is permitted. Okay, but that is how do we get onto? We got onto all of that because of the Avsha Milta. Let me just show you the Shulchan Aruch on this Mishnah, and then I want to share with you something in Rav Zevin, which I've mentioned anecdotally a number of times, but I found it in the Sefer, and I think it's very important while we're talking about Shechita on Shabbat. So the Shulchan Aruch over here, our Mishnah says as follows. Okay, this is the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Tzadichet. Now, Siman Taf Tzadichet is Siman right near the beginning of Hilchot Yom Tov. It's pretty long, 20 seifim. What is the title? What is the topic of the Siman? Dinei Shchita beYom Tov. Okay, so right at the beginning, Shulchan Aruch starts telling me about Shchita and lots of dinim and lots of complicated things that we need to know about Shchita and Yom Tov. In a moment, I'll show you why none of this is relevant today. But says the Shulchan Aruch over here, of course the principles are still relevant. So he says, Be'emam sukenet sheyalei shemat tamut. This is our Mishnah, I just explained a little bit more. Be'emam sukenet sheyalei shemat tamut. So you have a dangerous, sickly animal, you're scared it's going to die. And you've already eaten, so you don't need it. Remember, this is like what we saw in Tafkuf Gimel regarding our Ramah. If it's in the morning before you've eaten, so Beseda, Shalom Al Yisrael. But yeah, you've already eaten. Asur shachta. You may not shecht it. Unless there's enough time left in the day that you could go and eat it. You could eat a kazait of tzli right before Yom Tov goes out. Says the Rama, even if there's not enough time to open up the animal and to do the bdikot first. Okay, we'll see that. We'll see in a little bit in the Gemara what he's talking about. Okay, if there was time and you did do the shchita, okay. So the Mishnah Berurah over here, this is the Mishnah Berurah on the other siman. Where was it? Yeah. So we said like this. We said again in the beginning. We said Beimam Mesukenet Shirah Shemat Tamud v'Chag Havayin Zarech La'asur L'Shochtei Elem Ken Yesh Shehut Bayom Kedei Le'echol Mimena Kazayit Tzli. Kedei Le'echol Mimena Kazayit Tzli. So says the Mishnah Berurah, Kedei Le'echol Mimena Achar Shetetzei Nafsha K'ma Shektuv B'Yoredeh. Okay, after the shchita has been completed. V'af she'en b'da'ato le'echol mimena klum. Amazing, says the Mishnah Berurah. Even what the Mishnah said, in order that there's time for you to eat. He says, even if you didn't actually intend to eat from the animal. Why? Why is that allowed? V'atam. This is different to the explanation I gave previously. V'atam de'ofen zeh she'shehut le'echol okay, whenever we're dealing with melachot, Isurei melachot ochel nefesh on Yom Tov, we have to ask ourselves, is it an Isur Doraita or is it an Isur Drabanan? So we said the fact that you can't shech the animal now on Yom Tov, that's only an Isur Drabanan, it's not an Isur Torah. Why? The ilu ayu mizdamnele olchim shelo achlu adayin. You know why you could from the Torah? You could still do the shchita even though you've already eaten. Because what if you get a knock on the door? What if some guests show up and say that they haven't eaten? So okay, I'm finished. I'm going to have to shecht you an animal so I can feed you, right? This idea, this is a machloka we have in the Gemara Pesachim, Tin Rabba and Rav Chisda, what's called hoil. Hoil or miklo olchim. This relates to actually the whole concept of Eruv Tavshilin. When we spoke about it, all of Eruv Tavshilin is built on this principle. It's built on this principle that in the afternoon, from Yom Tov to Shabbat, you can't cook from Yom Tov for the next day. But if in the afternoon you were to have guests knocking at your door and you'd need to have food for them, so then you could cook. Therefore, on a doraita level, you're allowed to still cook even though you finished eating. Somebody told me this week they had a dream. They had a dream that they was Yom Tov afternoon and they had nowhere to eat and they came knocking on my door. Okay, so that was if that would happen, right? So you'd be allowed to cook for the person. So there we go. So therefore, it says this shchita on a Torah level, it's mutar. Right? Because it could be that you would need it for ochal nefesh. So in ken shchita is only great menechet ochal nefesh. Yefe. And therefore, says Misham Rava, okay. Therefore, even if you don't have guests now that came knocking on your door in a dream or otherwise, then there's no Isur Torah. So why do we say we can't do it? However, Chachamim said, no, if it's not really a Tzorach Yom Tov, we're not going to allow you to do the Melacha now. But it's a very, very important distinction. It's in, right? If there's not enough time left in the day for you to be able to eat, to roast and eat a kazait of this meat, once you've done the shchita, so that would be an Isur Torah. If it's an Isur Torah, there's nothing to talk about. But yeah, we're saying it's not an Isur Torah, but it's an Isur D'Rabanan, because Chachamim don't want us to do Melacha, it's not L'Tzorach Yom Tov. And he says, Komev said, Lo aminu Chachamim divrehem. Chachamim made the gzerah. They made a gzerah in certain situations. They did not make the gzerah in a situation of loss. And therefore, if you're going to lose out, if you're worried the animal's going to die, you could do the shchita. So now you'll say to me, hang on, what about if it's a healthy animal? What if there's no concern that the animal's going to die, but you're telling me as long as there's enough time in the day that I could eat it, I can have a gazait, there's no Isur D'Oraita, so it's an Isur D'Rabanan, so maybe yes. So it says, Mishnah Berurah, no, Masha Ein Ken B'Be'ema Bria, Ein Shachta. Right? There's no loss. There, Chachamim won't allow it. Ela Ken Tzarich La B'Yom Tov Gufa. Unless you actually need it on Yom Tov, then you could do it. Okay, let me turn this off. I want to share with you one more thing. Okay, because I've mentioned this a number of times, and as you've seen, Shulchan Aruch deals extensively with Hilchot Shchita and Yom Tov. Masechet deals extensively with the laws of Shchita on Yom Tov. This is a sefer. If anybody is not familiar with the sefer, I highly recommend it. This is Hamoadim Balacha. You can't see it because the screen's blurred, but Hamoadim Balacha of Rav Zevin, an absolute classic. And he goes through and he takes out the main halachic sugyas regarding each chag. So he has a couple of introductory prakim. Rav Zevin was the founder, the first editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudit, which is nowadays being completed by Rabbi Professor Avram Steinberg. But so he has here a few introductory chapters regarding Yom Tov in general, regarding Ochel Nefesh. And I'll read to you what he says. He says, before that he talks about smoking. And he talks about Ochel Nefesh and whether it's allowed. So there are certain things. He says there are certain melachot which once were considered asur, and nowadays there is a heter. So he says, "Aray b'melacha acheret noagin hayom b'chol ha'tvotzot li'isur v'hu davar shetero pashut b'mishnah b'gemar b'poskim." We have a melacha, which if you look in the Mishnah, including our Mishnah, the Gemara, the Pesukim, it's obvious and it's simple that it's mutar. But nowadays, everybody holds it to be asur. Everybody holds it to be forbidden. Shchita, and that is the melacha of shchita. Shchita be'emot. Zoi melechet ochel nefesh mamash. This is clearly a bona fide melacha of ochel nefesh. If you're trying to follow along in the Gemara, you won't be able to, because I'm reading from Rav Zevin. But he says, "Kama patei dinim uskol b'keshem shchita v'yom tov." We have a number throughout the Masechah, throughout Shas. We have a number of dinim. Dikat hasakin, about checking the knife on Yom Tov. Holachat ha'be'ema b'rshut harabim, carrying the be'ema in rshut harabim. Be'emot shel muktzeh, we've discussed that earlier. Egel shenolad b'Yom Tov, a calf which is born in Yom Tov, we saw that earlier. Mesukenet, that's our Mishnah. Chetzia shel Yisrael, chetzia shel Akum. What if you have a be'ema that half belongs to a Jew and half belongs to a non-Jew? We spoke about whether you could do a shchita on that. Tlishat atzemer m'kom shchita. What about the fact that you're uprooting the hair and the wool or the fur when you do the shchita? Have shetil to la'om chat basar v'od. And he says you have this extensive discussion. V'kol eila dinim ena makom achshav lemaaseh. None of this is practical nowadays. Ha'idna eno agin bizmanenu l'shchot shum be'ema b'yom tov afilu echad alo shchichet reifot. Okay, quotes here of the Magen Avraham the Magen Avraham quotes in the name of the Maharshal, who says that nowadays we do not do Shechita on Yom Tov, ever. Even in a place where there is no, we're not worried about treifot. So he says, Shagas Arya Mitzaded Lomar, שבמקומות שמצויות treifot, כמו כשרות עשו מן הדין לשחוט בהמה ביום טוב. Okay, so there's a bit of a discussion. Why is that? Some say because nowadays treifot are much more common, and since treifot are much more common, therefore when you shech the animal, it's not clear that that you're actually going to be able to use it. Right, that's one explanation which is brought. Another one, he says, the Netziv writes a different reason. He says, "Ein shoktim emo b'yom tov, אי אפשר בימינו שמכירת הבשר תתקיים לפי המבואר בגמרא בשולחן ערוך, בוודאי יבואו לידי חילול יום טוב בשעת המכירה, בכל זאת לצורך קדום מתרים הפוסקים sorry. So he says that nowadays the Netziv says that when we're concerned about the way you sell the meat, there are ways in terms of selling the meat that can be done without chilul Shabbat and Yom Tov. He says nowadays that wouldn't happen and everybody would transgress. He writes here that nonetheless, in a place where there's a tzorech gadol, we would still be allowed to shech. So what's a tzorech gadol? So mitorah b'chul b'chag haShavuot shechal liot achar Shabbat, shlosha yamim retzufim, so lishchot v'achom larov gadol b'oto hazman. So again, what he doesn't write, and what's advanced as well, is that the fact that nowadays you have fridges and freezers and we can keep the meat for a long time, that's obviously changed. It's changed the situation as well. But he says, if, for example, let's say you have 3 days of Yom Tov, you have Shavuot, which falls after Shabbat. So in Chutz La'aretz, you have 3 days in a row and it's very hot and maybe you're not going to be able to keep the meat. So he writes here, B'shnat Taf Reish Mem Zayin, it's over 100 years ago. Ratzu b'arbei kehilot atil lishchot b'yom harishon. And there was a discussion over there. He quotes here, Steichemer and others. There was a big pulmus in that year whether one could do shchita. But bottom line is that nowadays we basically don't do shchita and Yom Tov anymore. Even though in the Mishnah and the Gemara it seems to be obvious that it's mutar, circumstances have changed, and therefore, although the principles remain the same, it wouldn't apply. Okay, so that's our Mishnah. That's our Mishnah. The Gemara says, we'll just do maybe the first line or so. No, we'll pick it up tomorrow. By the way, tomorrow's our last year before Pesach. But says the Gemara, Marami bar Abba, hefshet v'nituach be'olah, v'uadin mekatzavim. So interesting, hefshet v'nituach is that you're flaying and you're skinning the animal. He says, we are told that we have to do this with an olah. Remember, now an olah, nobody eats an olah. The reason it's called an olah is because it goes up, it's completely consumed on the mizbeach. Says Rashi, Perush HaKatuv be'olah shehi achilat gavoa. Right, even though the olah is not eaten by anybody, it's all consumed on the mizbeach. V'hu adin yesh lamod lekatzavim b'achilat hediot. So we learn the same way with achilat gavoa. We learn that's the way you have to take the animal and you have to skin it, and that's the proper way to prepare it before you start going and start to eat it. So says the Gemara, Mikan imdat Torah derech eretz shelo yochel adam basar kodem yosef v'nituach. From here, the Torah is teaching you proper conduct, teaching you derech eretz that you should not eat the animal before you've done hefshet v'nituach and you've taken off the skin, etc. Now, the question is, what exactly does that mean? Right, limdat Torah derech eretz shelo yochel adam basar kodem hefshet v'nituach. Maika mashmalan. What are you coming to teach me? Are you coming to teach me? Just see Rashi. Derech Maika mashmalan says derech eretz or isur. Does that mean it's a good thing to do, or does that mean it's forbidden if you don't do it? That's a big enough kamena. Until you've skinned it and cut it up. Maybe you have to do it because there's a siman treifa that you can't see. And maybe we assume that we always say that the be'emah is a safek treifa until we know otherwise. In other words, do we have a chazakah that the animal is kosher unless we know that it's a treifa? Or are we going to say we have a safek chazakah that it's a treifa unless we know otherwise? That's the question. That's what's not so clear exactly about the statement of Rami bar Abba. Okay. Ad Khan, we'll stop there for today. And we'll see you all tomorrow. Our last year before Pesach. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Also.